Well, topping this hour of 360, new reporting on the story that CNN first broke, the White House pressuring the FBI to knock down reports of Trump campaign contact with Russia. Tonight, White House reaction and their timeline of who said what to whom. Also this hour, two former top FBI officials weigh in, so will legendary investigative reporter Carl Bernstein. But first, the very latest from CNN Chief National Security Correspondent Jim Sciutto.
Tonight, the White House vehemently defending, asking the FBI to deny reports of communications between Trump campaign associates and Russians known to U.S. intelligence. The administration's intense pushback follows CNN's exclusive reporting of the White House request. Senior administration officials insisting it only asked for the denial after a top FBI official himself volunteered that the New York Times story on those communications was inaccurate. White House officials, who asked not to be named, today outlined their timeline of events, saying the conversation happened on February 15th, after a 7:30 a.m. meeting led by White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus. FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe asked Priebus for 5 minutes alone after the meeting ends. This according to senior administration officials, and calls a report linking Trump campaign advisors to Russian intelligence total BS. Priebus, the White House says, asked McCabe, quote, "Can we do anything about it?" and whether there is something the FBI can do to, quote, "set the record straight." Later, in separate conversations, McCabe and FBI Director James Comey tell Priebus the FBI cannot comment on the reports. Priebus then asks Comey if he can cite McCabe and Comey as, quote, top intelligence officials in pushing back on the story himself in TV interviews last Sunday, which he did.
I've talked to the top levels of the intelligence community, and they've assured me that New York Times story was grossly overstated and inaccurate and totally wrong.
The direct communications between the White House and the FBI were unusual because of decade-old restrictions on such contacts concerning pending investigations.
You don't even want the appearance of political influence with respect to an investigation or prosecution. That's why the protocols are in place.
Mr. Trump also criticized the FBI directly, tweeting today, quote, "The FBI is totally unable to stop the national security leakers that have permeated our government for a long time. They can't even find the leakers within the FBI itself. Classified information is being given to media that could have a devastating effect on U.S. Find now."
So, Jim, what more are you learning?
Well, this is the key here. On the broader issue of communications between Trump advisors during the campaign and Russians and other Russian officials and other Russians known to U.S. intelligence, the White House is actually not denying that such communications took place. And in fact, we know that today, right now, the FBI is investigating those communications. In addition to that, both the Senate and the House Intelligence Committees, keep in mind, both led by Republicans with Republican majorities, they are still investigating those communications. So Reince Priebus, in some of his public comments, seem to be saying there's nothing to these stories. But fact is, the FBI, the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, they disagree. They're still investigating those communications.
And what Reince Priebus has been particularly pointing to is New York Times reporting, which was different than CNN's reporting.
It's true. Reince Priebus, the White House seemed to be zeroing in on this detail. New York Times reported these communications were with, quote unquote, Russian intelligence. Our reporting is that the communications between Trump advisors and Russians were with Russians known to U.S. intelligence, Russian officials, diplomats, etc. And the FBI, the Senate, House Intelligence Committees are still trying to establish what those Russians' connections are to the Kremlin, to Russian intelligence, etc. They haven't established it yet. They haven't eliminated those connections, but they haven't established it yet. And it appears to be that detail that the White House is zeroing in on.
All right, Jim Sciutto, thanks.
Thank you.
One other quick note on a reaction inside the White House. A source telling CNN this is being seen as a, quote, distraction the president doesn't need right now, end quote. Back with us is former FBI Deputy Director John Pistole, who's now president of Anderson University. Also Phil Mudd, a former senior official at the FBI, as well as the CIA, and journalist Carl Bernstein.
Carl, let's start with you. I mean, to be precise, if Reince Priebus was told by the FBI that reporting about campaign ties to Russian intelligence was BS, and again, CNN did not report campaign ties to Russian intelligence. CNN reported, as Jim Sciutto pointed out, campaign ties to Russians known to U.S. intelligence. There's a difference. Can you blame, I mean, on the one hand, can you blame Priebus for wanting to get that out there publicly? The flip side is the FBI and the West Wing are not supposed to be talking about ongoing investigations, right?
First of all, if Hillary Clinton were president and somebody in the White House did this, there would be calls by Republicans on Capitol Hill for a select committee to investigate for criminal actions and perhaps possible impeachment, though that might be exaggerated. That's what would probably happen. Second of all, what we don't have out of this White House is a real explanation from the campaign, the Trump organization, or anyone else connected with the president, including the president himself, about his dealings with Russia, his business dealings in that part of the world, his finances. This is a huge story. It is the subject of 2 congressional investigations, an FBI investigation, and the press is investigating. And one of the reasons we are watching Donald Trump make the conduct of the press the issue in this country instead of the conduct of Donald Trump, the President of the United States, is because they are not cooperating. They are stonewalling. I don't know why, but that is what we are seeing so far. We are seeing a sideshow here about the press, about the First Amendment, when in fact there is information that the president could give us, including his taxes, that might put an end to all of this if there were plenty of explanations easily given.
So do you think some of the kind of machinations against the press, particularly today, is a way to distract reporters from this FBI story? Carl?
Oh, yes,
Sorry.
I do. But again, I think the larger thing is that Donald Trump is a creature of media. His whole career and professional life has been based on a media frenzy of his creation. He's a master manipulator, and we're watching it. We have so many stories up in the air right now that we can't keep track of them, and I think that's exactly what Donald Trump wants. He wants to make the conduct of the press, as I say, the real issue that will divide the country, appeal to his base, keep Republicans in line, and I'm not at all sure that it's going to work in the long run, because he has no interest in the truth whatsoever. And the best obtainable version of the truth is really what the media is engaged in here. It's time for us, I guess, to do more reporting, more investigative reporting. We don't need to defend ourselves. We need to get down to work and keep reporting this story as well as his agenda.
Which is why we're leading with this story tonight and not the media story, which we'll also cover in this next hour. John, John, you were the former FBI deputy director. Would you have ever reached out to the West Wing to discuss a politically sensitive investigation of the West Wing, or would you have deferred that to the firewall that, at least in theory, is supposed to be in place?
Well, I think there are 2 fundamental issues at play here. One is the FBI obviously needs to be independent in its conduct of investigations, whether those be criminal investigations or national security investigations. The second principle, though, is that the FBI, particularly through the Department of Justice, and usually the Attorney General or Deputy Attorney General, need to keep the White House informed of significant matters, particularly as it relates to national security. So I think some people are conflating the 2 at times here to say what is appropriate or what's not. The question, for example, on the national security side would be just what happened when Acting Attorney General Sally Yates informed the White House about the concerns with General Flynn. And so that's something that it was ongoing, and so they took the appropriate steps. It would not be appropriate for the FBI to unilaterally inform or brief the White House on ongoing either criminal or national security matters.
Phil, I mean,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, yeah, the times that I did the briefings at the White House, either in the Oval Office or in the Situation Room, it was always with the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General, because there was a unified briefing team there.
Phil, does it make sense to you that the Deputy FBI Director would initiate contact with the Chief of Staff to discuss news reports about an ongoing investigation, especially one involving the President's allies?
Well, hold on. We made a big assumption here. We assume that he's talking about an ongoing investigation. I think John is right. There's a lot of information being conflated here. Let me give you a scenario, Anderson, because we don't know exactly what happened here. The scenario is the White House is building a relationship with different agencies, including the CIA and the FBI, and then there's a major news report about an ongoing FBI investigation. I don't think it's inappropriate in the least for the FBI Deputy Director, who's one of the best officers I ever worked with, Andy McCabe, to go over to the White House and say, we're sorry about what happened in that news leak. We're not responsible for that news leak. We want to develop a relationship with you, and that relationship is built on trust. that report was overstated, understated, misrepresented our investigation. That, to me, is not inappropriate, nor is it a revelation about what kind of investigation the FBI had ongoing. Precision of language, Anderson, is important here.
Is it then inappropriate if Reince Priebus then asked that the FBI kind of make that public?
I think it's inappropriate if he pressed it. Look, we have Reince Priebus, who was with the RNC, the Republican National Committee, has transitioned to the White House. We're a month into a new White House. He might not know how this game works. He may not know that it's inappropriate to ask the Bureau to talk about an ongoing investigation. I think the real question, Anderson, the fascinating one, is why the White House characterizes this as a leak at all. A leak is when you reveal national security information, for example, about a CIA operation. This is something that embarrasses the White House. That's not a leak. That's a news story. I participated in leak work at the CIA, for example, when the news media got information about us chasing down an al-Qaeda terrorist, and I talked to a major newspaper 12 years ago to prevent them from running that story because we were afraid that terrorist would go to ground. That was a potential leak. This is an embarrassment. The two are not the same.
Carl, do you make that difference as well?
Yeah, I think that it's not. Look, this is a news story. It is a legitimate news story. That what the White House is engaged in is trying to knock down any story that goes into the facts about the status of investigations, about the substance of investigations, about Donald Trump's relationships with Russia, with the nations around Russia, with ethno-Russians. They want to stomp on these stories. That's the objective. And it's inappropriate to go to the FBI in the way that Priebus did.
We just lost Carl. That happens on live TV. Phil, just to state the obvious, though, I mean, the head of the FBI works for the Attorney General, who works for the President. It can get complicated in a hurry when you're talking about mixing politics and an investigation into the President's allies. I'm just talking in general.
I can understand, Ann Anderson, but let's cut this apart a bit. Let's talk about the FBI interactions with the White House. I can't remember how many White House meetings I went to. You sit next to somebody who's a White House official and you say something like, let's talk afterwards. As I mentioned before, I'm sorry about that leak. We see those people, and I'm sure John Pistole did, all the time. A 5-minute conversation between the Deputy Director of the FBI and a senior White House official should not be seen as an aberration. Let's focus, though, on what's happening here. In the past day or two, the White House is talking about leaks and FBI investigation of leaks, and nobody's talking about the foundations of White House interactions with the Russians and congressional investigations and what the Russians did during the elections. This is a shell game by the White House to say, we don't want to focus on what the story is, that is Russia. We want to focus on false allegations that the FBI leaked something sensitive, which is incorrect.
We've got to leave it there. Plenty more to talk about on this creature of the media, as Carl described the president, and what Phil just called a shell game. Harsh words from the president today on so-called leaks and using unnamed sources from a chief executive who, according to published reports, let's keep in mind, used to call up reporters when he was a civilian, pretending to be his own press agent to give leaks about himself. More details ahead.
What's going on?